Through most of this campaign on our European future, the Remain camp, led by the Prime Minister, have dominated the headlines with blood-curdling warnings about the economic dangers of leaving. But this week, the Leave campaign has put itself right back in the game, and the issue that's cutting through, you know what it is, immigration. Immigration story really started back in 2004 when a surge of migrants arrived here from Eastern Europe, and the man in charge then, who is today a passionate advocate of Remain, is Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister. And as the gloves come off over immigration, one of the most vocal opponents of EU membership and a likely contender in any Tory leadership campaign, the former Defence Secretary Liam Fox, joins me as well. Also here, reviewing our papers, a man who knows all about the turmoil the euro has caused, but nevertheless wants us to stay inside the EU, Greece's former Finance Minister, Yanis Varoufakis. Speaking of Greece, have we in this country also treated it as a sun-soaked holiday destination and not thought enough about the people who actually live there? That's the theme of a new play starring Elizabeth McGovern of Downton Abbey fame. I caught up with a dressed-down Lady Grantham at the National Theatre this week. And there's music, the Nashville singer who created what might have been John Peel's favourite album ever, Laura Cantrell.
To be served your heart is enough to know we'll never part.
And alongside Yanis Varoufakis, one of Fleet Street's leading Eurosceptic voices, the Daily Mail's Amanda Plattel. But first, the news from Christian Fraser.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. Two senior Conservatives have publicly challenged David Cameron to accept the failure of his manifesto pledge to cut immigration. The Prime Minister promised to reduce net migration below 100,000 a year. The current figure is more than 3 times that amount. Boris Johnson and the Justice Secretary Michael Gove, who both support the Vote Leave campaign, have written an open letter saying the promise to slash net immigration to the tens of thousands is not achievable as long as the UK is a member of the EU. They say the failure to keep this promise is corrosive of public trust in politics. Downing Street described the move as a transparent attempt to distract from the fact that most economists think that leaving the single market would be disastrous for jobs, prices and opportunities. Iraqi government forces have made gains in their offensive to drive so-called Islamic State militants from Fallujah. Large numbers of troops have been deployed near the city and have taken the town of Karma, which was the front line of the IS defence. It comes just days after Washington said an Islamic State commander was killed, along with dozens of militants, in US-led coalition airstrikes. A man has been killed in Poland and a child is on life support in a French hospital after a series of lightning strikes across Europe. The child was struck during a birthday party in a park in Paris. According to local authorities, 11 people, including 8 children, were injured while trying to seek shelter under a tree. The 100th anniversary of the Battle of Verdun, the longest of the First World War, will be commemorated in France today. As many as 800,000 soldiers are believed to have been killed or wounded during the 1916 battle, which became known as the Hell of Verdun. The French President François Hollande and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel are expected to call for European unity when they lay wreaths at the site this morning. That's all from me for now. Back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Christian. Now, the front page is, you'd expect lots of politics, and sure enough, you've got them. There's Cameron, too rich to care about immigration. Priti Patel, the pro-Brexit minister, says in a very incendiary series of comments. We'll talk about that later on. I can't show you the front page of The Sun because it's all about actors, and I can't show you page 3 for other reasons. But here is page 2. It's about the referendum. Brexiteers plot shootout with Cam after poll. And that shootout starts really on the Sunday Times. That was the first story you heard on the news just now. Boris and Gove lash Cameron on immigration. And it's a pretty tough letter because it suggests that he undermined deliberately public trust by that tens of thousands promise. Finally, there's the Mail on Sunday, a story about Baroness Scotland there. John Major slamming Brexit fraud inside, taking a slightly different view probably on these matters than the Daily Mail, if I may say so. And finally, there's the Observer, massive boost for the Prime Minister as over 600 economists reject Brexit. That is the story that Number 10 say the other stories are there to divert us away from. But we are going to be diverted anyway. Yanis Varoufakis, it's great to have you here. And you've chosen the first story, the Boris and Gove front page splash on the Sunday Times.
Well, the reason I did this was because it signifies the retreat by the Tories who are for the Leave campaign from what I consider to be their strong issue, which is sovereignty and democracy. They've retreated from this. And this is a major defeat for the quality of the debate. They've retreated to the UKIP agenda of scaremongering about migration.
Well, this is very interesting because the two campaigns sort of were against each other, the UKIP campaign and the Tory campaign. And the Tories said the reason we don't want to join up is that you'll just bang on about immigration. And here we are.
What they've found during the first part of this, because this campaign's been running for some weeks now, is that the Leave campaign have completely lost the argument on the economy. And so now they're thinking, they had a regroup last week. They thought, right, we've got a month to go. What can we win on? And democracy and sovereignty are wonderful notions, but it's not raw meat for an election. And immigration is.
The tragedy is that the Leave campaign's strong argument is about democracy and sovereignty, and their weakest argument and most misanthropic from where I'm standing argument is migration. The fact that they are retreating to the grabby part of the Leave narrative simply shows panic and a descent to an abyss from which I do not believe they can recover.
It is unfair to call grubby what millions of people in this country really care about in terms of the pressures on their schools and the NHS and all sorts of things.
This is not grubby. Of course, these are genuine concerns.
Right.
But the narrative that I am reading in the newspapers today is grubby.
Well, you see it.
So just to be clear, you said earlier on there was a meeting earlier this week, and this is all a kind of planned change of tack, entirely deliberate.
Absolutely. They just realised that they'd completely lost the argument on the economy, that the argument they could have won was on the euro, because, as Yanis knows more than anyone, that is in a perilous state. But they didn't win it, time was running out, so they thought they do what everyone does in a campaign. You go back to what you think your strongest points are. And look at this today in the Sun. I mean, crikey, we've got Michael Gove having, slagged off David Cameron and the Remains. In the Sunday Times, you've got this interview here where he says the 5 reasons, the 5 key facts that David Cameron can't answer, and it is immigration, all just different forms of immigration.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. The force of this letter is that it's true in the sense that the tens of thousands promise could not possibly technically be met ever. And so to go for the Prime Minister and say, you have made a big mistake on that, is a very, very sort of sound...
Doesn't it also make you think, Andrew, who also is very key in all the campaigns? Michael Gove and the other Tories can't say that, oh gosh, we didn't want to support this claim. They supported it the last election. So it's really a curse on all of them for conning the British people all this time.
Andrew, your point is an excellent one. The worst enemy of the Remain campaign has been David Cameron. Promises that he has delivered that cannot be fulfilled. And the fudge that he came back from Brussels, which he presented as a reform agenda for the European Union. I am a supporter of Remain, but I wish that David Cameron was not campaigning on my side.
Very good. Right, where are we going next then? The Economist, I think, is the next thing, isn't it?
Well, a very brief comment against my own lot.
It was once said, Yanis, that if you laid every economist in the world end to end, they still wouldn't reach a conclusion.
Yes, indeed, indeed. But there's something worse to say about us. The Royal Economic Society, of which I am a member, and the 600 economists that reject Brexit are the very same economists to whom the Queen, if you recall, after the 2008 catastrophe, addressed a letter with a devastating question. Why didn't you see it coming? And they spent 3 months concocting the longest apology in the history of social science.
So we shouldn't...
To have those same economists, us lot, with our wonderful predictive powers...
I got to tell you, we don't trust you that much, with all due respect.
Well, good. You shouldn't. That's the point I'm making, that you should not trust an economist to predict the future.
Amanda,
we've never predicted anything. Right?
No, indeed, that's also true.
Well, we just go on. I mean, there's so much mudslinging now. That's the most distinctive thing that's happened this weekend. Is that the gloves are off, the knives are out of the back pockets, and you see John Major, saying he's savaging boorish Brexit. He's effectively in parliamentary terms, calling the Michael Gove and Boris Johnson et al. and Liam Fox, when we see him later, being liars. that
And they're calling the Prime Minister somebody who has corroded public trust.
Yes,
so it's
I know.
not very... What happens at the end of all of this, Amanda? Do you take the view that whatever happens in the vote, there is going to be a leadership challenge quite quickly?
I think if I were to bet on it, yes, because there's such bitterness at the way that the government has used all their own resources to create this fear campaign during the start of the election. And, you know, these people used to be friends. You know, I mean, Michael Gove
Yes,
and David
indeed.
Cameron used to be great friends. You can't go back from that.
It's always a family
And-
argument that's the worst.
And there is also, you know, I've been in meetings, or, you know, met up for drinks, I have to say, with a number of these people who claim that they're the ones who want Cameron out, who claim they've already got the 50 signatures they need. They can't wait. They think that they win.
On John Major's point, if I may
Yeah.
quickly add something that links it to the previous discussion about
Yeah.
economists, John Major is completely right. The treasuries and George Osborne's figures are utterly dodgy. They are not worth the paper they're written on. But where John Major he's highlighting the fact that the Leave campaign is also based on dodgy statistics. Let's face it. This is a one-off event. It has never happened in the history of the world for a country like Britain to leave a
Yes.
union like the European Union, which means you have a sample of 0.
Yes.
And therefore, any attempt statistically to pin down what this will mean for mortgages, the value of the pound, the trade, and so on, it's not based on any scientific fact. The discussion we should be having should be about sovereignty. It should be about the effect of a Brexit on Europe, on the British people. This is the discussion we should be having.
I think I've just found an economist I trust.
There we go. It's a little thing
Yes,
going on
is
the
that I
sofa
don't trust
here.
economists. That's why you can trust me.
Now, I'm going to stick, however, with the Tory infighting story, because the other big bit of this is my colleague John Peanut had a very interesting interview with a Tory backbencher who says there are the numbers.
heard it.
We are going to have this. We're going to have this challenge. And that kind of connects a little bit to Priti Patel, who's really going for the jugular as well.
Well, you can see that Priti, you know, she was one of David Cameron's proteges. She's just going for broke now. She's totally distancing herself from the leadership of the Tory party because, you know, these people actually suspect they've got a good chance of getting Cameron out really quickly. So they may lose the referendum, but for them, it's a lose-win situation because they think they're going to get Cameron out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's a sad fact that a monumental referendum for the future of Britain and Europe boils down to a Tory infighting
And of course, the campaign.
tussle about who's going to replace a Prime Minister who's already declared that he doesn't want to be Prime Minister for much longer.
Which is, in a sense, ridiculous, of course, because an awful lot of these campaigns aren't Tory at all. There's a big Labour Leave campaign and a Labour Stay campaign.
But it's
There's
hardly
UKIP
visible,
and
is
so
it?
forth.
You know, I mean, we had Ed Miliband out yesterday. You know, we've got former Prime Ministers, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair. You know, none of the big hitters are at the heart of government, at the heart of the opposition, are actually putting their heads
Well,
up.
yesterday at UCL, we had a major event with John McDonnell and Caroline Lucas, and we had more than 1,000 people, and we tried to do exactly that, to bring the radical case for participating in the referendum from our Remain, Stay
Yes.
in campaign, but to actually animate it and to
Yes.
have something to say that goes beyond tactics. So there are people on the left in this country who are arguing that Brexit should be supported because that will split the Tory party. This kind of mindset,
petty.
it's very petty. It's just as petty as the other side, the Tory side. This is a significant juncture in the history of Europe, and we should be worried about its effect on the generations to come.
Now, we're showing the Tony Blair interview in a little bit of time.
Yes.
Blair's all over the papers as well, of
Yeah.
course, making his case.
I mean, but Blair at least does, you know, end up saying in this piece, you know, his main argument seems to be, you know, if you have any concerns, don't leave because, you know, there's a devil that you know and a devil that you don't know is basically his argument.
But beforehand, I pleaded that David Cameron should not be trying to help the Remain campaign. If that is so, imagine how much more it's pertinent in the case of Tony Blair. Having Tony Blair on your side on any campaign is just a glass of poison.
And
Yes, a
you've
bucket of poison.
picked up, not the glass of poison, but you've picked up a story in the Sunday Telegraph about the Chilcot inquiry.
Yes,
which, of course, doesn't-
I'm surprised by this issue, whether he should be tried and imprisoned or not. I think that the best outcome from the point of view of history and humanity would be for Tony Blair to be forgotten and treated with the contempt that he deserves.
He
I'm
would
really
hate you to
sorry.
say that.
We
He
failed
would
to forget him on this programme yet, but I take your point. Any last stories before we crash
Oh, do you
out
want
of
something
the
a bit
paper review?
lighter?
Sorry?
Something to cheer you up?
Something to cheer us
Well,
up,
there was
yes.
this wonderful thing on Britain's Got Talent last night, and they had this serving officer who did this card trick, and he magicked up this guy who used to do magic tricks in the Burma Railway during the Second World War, and then they pulled back the flag. It was absolutely fantastic, wonderful English, heroic, patriotic music, and there was this 96-year-old former card trick magician. It
Not a
was
dry eye
great
in the
TV,
house.
although tonight
Well,
we're both going to be watching Top
Yes,
Gear, aren't we?
we are both petrol heads. And I'm looking forward to see to what extent can the BBC stage spontaneity
very
and
interesting
recreate the chaotic political incorrectness
chemistry
of the previous lot.
OK, well, we'll all be watching
We're
that.
not
That was
watching
a
it
great
together.
pay-per-view. We're going to hear from Yanis again later on, but thank you both very much. And now to the weather. And I'm indebted to the Times newspaper this week for reminding me how the American poet James Lowell described May. Not just a capricious month, a pious fraud, a ghastly parody of real spring, which seems to me pretty reasonable. So now for a weather forecast delivered, I'm sure, entirely in verse. Here's Thomas Schaffenacker.
Wishful thinking. I've got something a lot more corny. Sunshine, sunshine in the sky, see-through clouds to tickle your eye. That's as far as I'm going to go. And that's exactly what we've got today, actually. The sun will be tickling our eyes all through the course of this afternoon. Most of us, that is. It's looking absolutely fine out there. It was a little grey across eastern areas around the North Sea coast here. A bit gloomy first thing in the morning. But now the sun's out and it promises to be a beautiful sunny Sunday out there. However, there are a few showers in the forecast, perhaps across northern and central parts of Scotland, even a thunderstorm, a couple of showers across the hills of Wales and in the southeast. But temperatures widely today in the 20s. Cooler on that North Sea coast, though. Tomorrow, Bank Holiday Monday, once again, many of us have the day off. Lots of sunshine around across western and central areas of the UK. But notice, and we've been forecasting this for the last few days, we are in fact expecting some rainfall into parts of East Anglia, London, possibly down into Brighton a little bit later on in the afternoon. But once again, the vast majority of the UK should enjoy a fine Bank Holiday Monday with lots of sunshine. Come Tuesday, back to work. We are in fact expecting a little bit of rain, but some areas will still remain sunny in the west. That's it. Back to you, Andrew.
Rain on Monday, there you go. Now, immigration, as I said, became the main theme of the Vote Leave campaign last week, perhaps not surprising with the release of official figures showing net migration to the UK at 330,000 last year. There's no escaping that statistic, and it stands in contrast to David Cameron's target of reducing immigration to tens of thousands. Now the Leave campaign have written to the Prime Minister urging him to accept that this pledge has not been met and is, quotes, corrosive to public trust. One of the leading figures on the Leave side, the Conservative former Defence Secretary, Liam Fox, is here. Good morning to you, Liam Fox. That letter which your side has sent to the Prime Minister is a statement of fact, isn't it? You cannot, no government inside the EU can guarantee that immigration falls to tens of thousands.
No Conservative MP who was elected at the last election can fulfil our pledge to the British people on immigration, including me, if we stay in the European Union. And I think that one of the points that people have failed to grasp is I'm quite sure the Prime Minister wanted to be able to get restrictions on free movement, to be able to meet that target, but it wasn't on offer. There is no reformed EU. It is a fantasy.
So was this ignorance or was this deceit?
And I think the Prime Minister wanted to get that change. We all wanted it. But it's now totally clear to us that if we stay in the European Union with free movement, and we saw 184,000 net EU migrants coming to the UK last year, that will not be a pledge that we can meet. It is impossible when you're planning public services to be able to deal with those sort of numbers and have school places predicted, NHS, housing. They are all huge issues for real people. And when Downing Street said today that this was a distraction, it's not a distraction. It's a huge issue for many people who are facing the implications of this immigration in their real lives.
But you're saying, surely, are you not, therefore, that your party went into the election on a manifesto that was not true?
No, it was entirely possible to get that, but only, in my view, if we left the European Union. I remember coming on your programme and saying, actually, the renegotiation was not going to achieve what we wanted because it was clear that our European partners were not going to change course. They're not changing course on anything. They're still progressing with the European army plans. Everything suggests ever closer union is still on the card. So our choice as a country is between getting control, and taking our own destiny into our own hands, or ever closer union, ending up in what is likely to be much closer to a single European state. That's not the future that I want for my country.
Ferocious stuff in the papers today, blue on blue and all the rest of it. Can it all be put back together again after the referendum? Do you think the Prime Minister should carry on after the referendum? Do you think he should lead any negotiation with the rest of the EU if we vote to leave?
If we vote to leave, my personal view is that the best thing would be for the Prime Minister to stay on. We will have to have a government position before we enter into negotiations under Article 50. We need a period of stability, and whatever our views have been during the referendum, we need to put to bed all those personal views and understand that stability for the country is the most important element.
But 50 of your colleagues have put their names down for a challenge after this vote, haven't they?
Well, they may or may not have. I mean, I've heard these stories on and off for 24 years. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it would not be wise, in my view, if we decide to leave and there will be a period of uncertainty about what the government's negotiating position would be. We don't want to add political instability to that. Our responsibility
and so you would say
is
to
to the
Andrew
country, not the
Bridgen
party.
and others, just stop it?
My view is, let's stick to the issues. There are very, very big issues at stake for our country in this referendum. Let's not turn it into an internal Conservative Party debating society. I want to leave the European Union because I want control of our own lawmaking. Sovereignty for me is key. I want control of our own money that we're handing over at the moment to Brussels, and I want control over our own borders. They're much more important to me than what happens inside the Conservative Party.
And so forget all this stuff about coups and getting against Cameron and so on. Drop that, is your message to colleagues. Concentrate on the issues.
Concentrate on the very big issues that are affecting Britain and our future. Because what people have to ask themselves, if you weren't in the European Union already, would you choose to join it on the 23rd of June? And if you wouldn't choose to join, don't choose to stay, because you're joining it for the next generation.
Can I ask you to give 2 cheers for migrants? In particular, the European migrants who come in here. These are overwhelmingly kind of hard-working people who are helping, keep up our public services. You see them in hospitals, and you see them in the private sector, in hotels and restaurants and stuff, and in the agriculture sector, up and down the country, very often doing jobs that British people no longer want to do for that money.
I don't have a problem with migration. I have a problem with uncontrolled migration. I would actually like us to have overall control of migration on a point system like the Australians. But we can't have that because we are committed to total free movement. And it's that uncontrolled element, the fact we can't control the impact on public services, which is a very real problem, not something that Goldman Sachs and those who are funding the Remain campaign ever have to worry about because they probably don't use them, but that a lot of ordinary, hard-working people in this country face problems as a result of the fact that we've had this huge increase in our population driving our housing policy, NHS, demand, and school places. They are real problems. So I don't have a problem with migration. I have a problem with uncontrolled.
But you think it's simply too high?
I have a problem with I want us to control that number. We may decide that we want that number.
Well, I was going to ask you, after Brexit, if that happens, we would still be taking migrants from the rest of the EU, but we would be deciding how many and who they were. Is that your view?
What I want is a decent and humane immigration policy that actually determines what we need in this country, and we match that with the supply of labour that may come from overseas. And not just the EU, but our countries outside the EU, Canada, Australia, other countries, who are actually being discriminated against because of this EU migration policy.
And at that point, do you think you could get down to tens of thousands?
I think it's possible to do it. You have to take some pretty tough decisions. But we are an economy that's doing very well. We're acting as a magnet for migration. When the living wage comes in, if we still have open borders in terms of migration, that will be a much bigger number, given the continuing failure of the Eurozone and what it's doing to young people's futures across the continent.
Nonetheless, we have needed immigration into this country. Your colleague Sarah Wollaston, who's on your side in this debate, nonetheless says that if you go into the NHS and you meet a European immigrant, they're much likelier to be looking after you, healing you, than they are to be a patient.
I don't have a problem with as I said, I don't have a problem with migration. I have a problem with uncontrolled migration and the pressure that puts not only on public services, but a downward pressure on wages. The Bank of England have said for every 10% increase in the migrant population, that's a 2% reduction in wages. It's very hard to see how you get a high wage economy, but at the same time have open borders and uncontrolled migration.
Priti Patel has said today that the Prime Minister is simply too rich to get this message that you've been told. Doesn't understand what life is like for too many people in this country. Do you agree with her?
No, I don't agree with that, and I think that the Prime Minister entirely understands that. but I think that he has committed us to membership of the European Union on terms that I simply cannot accept. I'm sure that he would like to have had a restriction on the numbers coming into Britain, but our European partners will not wear it. And this idea that we can influence them to changing some of those core elements of ever closer union, it's simply a fantasy. I have a problem with ever closer union because the logical end point is union. That is not what I want for this country.
And you're quite worried about the Gibraltar situation at the moment as well, aren't you?
Well, I think the one thing that you never do in any campaign is to play with security. And the sovereignty of the people of Gibraltar has always been guaranteed by the United Kingdom. To pretend in any way, shape or form that that policy would change, whether we're in or outside the European Union, is inexcusable. And the only way to deal with it...
Who has done that?
The Remain campaign have suggested that Gibraltar's sovereignty might be at stake. That is absolutely, as I say, inexcusable. And the only way we can deal with that is for the Prime Minister to say the sovereignty of Gibraltar will not be a question that we will tolerate inside or outside the European. Their security is guaranteed by the United Kingdom.
And you think we need that statement now?
I think we need that clarity, because I think even the vaguest inference that we might hand over the sovereignty of Gibraltar to Spain if we're not inside the European Union is completely unacceptable. I think there are limits to what you can and cannot say in any campaign. That goes way beyond acceptable limits.
And this requires a personal intervention by the Prime Minister to get that clarity.
I think he's the only person with the authority to make the government's position clear and unequivocal, that Gibraltar is protected by the United Kingdom and will continue to be protected whether we're in the European Union or out. We need a clear statement.
Liam Fox, there's much more to talk about. Luckily, you've agreed to join us later on the sofa of shame at the end of the programme, but for now, thank you very much indeed. As the chatelaine of Downton Abbey, Elizabeth McGovern was one of the best-known faces on our television screens for 6 years. Now, in a new production at the National Theatre, she plays a very different American wife from Lady Grantham. Sunset at the Villa Thalia is a drama set in Greece during the Colonel's coup of the 60s and the political turmoil of the 1970s. It's a play I almost guarantee you're going to hear a lot about. I caught up with Elizabeth between rehearsals at the National, and we began by discussing the Downton phenomenon.
But you know what I think? I think the more adaptable we are, the more chance we have of getting through.
We'll do it. Edith has risen from the cinders in the hearth to be kissed by her very own Prince Charming. What more can we ask?
A long and happy life together, just we two, to watch the children grow. That's all I want.
And why not?
All drama comes from throwing people into an enclosed space and then watching the friction that ensues. So in that respect, Downton is very much like any other great TV show or piece of theatre.
You sound like you're a genuine fan. There are other eminent members of the cast who are not, famously, but...
Of Downton?
Downton, yeah.
Well, I mean, I am of the school of thought that I have only to be grateful for the kind of impact that Downton had. You know, it's very rare that someone works on anything that takes off in the way it did.
It's so good of you to stay, Mama.
It's good of you to ask me, Cora. It is your kingdom now.
It's made you a sort of big star, both in this country and in the United States. Because to me, the most interesting thing about your career is turning your back. You were big in Hollywood with all the greats in Hollywood. You could have gone right to the top, and you walked away. Just tell us why.
I don't think I perceived the course of my career as consciously walking away from anything as much as being drawn by interesting work that I couldn't resist, that led me to other places, and that's kind of continues to be my modus operandi, and it's made me very happy and always very passionate about what I'm doing. But you know, it may lead back to Hollywood one day.
Who knows? Because Hollywood is this great kind of sticky magnet of money and glamour and fame, and you did move away from it, wasn't it? I think you talked about the cult of personality you didn't like very much at the time.
Yes, I mean, that was not the kind of work that I was ever drawn to doing.
And you feel comfortable? You're now a Chiswick High Street girl.
I am. Bury me in the back garden. I love it there.
Elizabeth, this is a play set in Greece in the 1960s and 70s. Just give us a little sense of the underlying theme.
two couples meet on holiday on a Greek island, one British, one American, and they encounter, of course, the local population. So it's an exploration of the clash of cultures. It's an exploration of the British and the American imperialistic way of taking advantage of the countries that they visit unwittingly and with the best intentions. It's about many, many things, which makes it a very interesting play to work on.
I suppose it's something that all of us have done, which is go to somewhere beautiful and treat it like a backdrop, not as a real place, not be interested enough in the people who've been living there for generations.
Exactly, and even the extension of that is somehow to want to own it, to want to buy, to want to take it home with you, and to control it. I mean, a lot of the play touches on the American tendency to infiltrate these governments with the excuse of the Soviet Union as the enemy and try to control their politics.
So this is back in the day of the Colonel's coup and all of that.
Exactly.
And the American guy clearly works for the CIA. And interestingly, the British couple are artistic. She's an actress and he's a writer. And there's a lot of Anglo-American tensions there too. The British are rather complacent about how they are better people than the Americans. The Americans are doing all these terrible things in Chile and so forth, but the British sit back and enjoy the sun and patronise the locals.
Well, precisely, and that's one of the things about the play that I'm most fascinated by, is that there are these two couples that have an initial love affair. There are the artists and the intellectuals, and the other couple are the people that do the hard knocks of protecting the world that the artists and the intellectuals enjoy. And they say to these artists and intellectuals, listen, I'm creating a world by being in the CIA, by protecting your right to freedom of speech and all these things we take for granted. And then you turn around and you criticize me for what I'm doing, but I'm actually creating the life that makes you capable of living.
And this is also about the close connection between the theatre and democracy. It's a point the American character makes very, very vividly about how theatre and democracy emerged in Greece at the same time and shares the same sort of space of storytelling and getting ourselves into other people's heads.
Precisely, and it's the democracy that the CIA protects that creates the world of the theatre, and the two were born at exactly the same time in Greece, as it happens.
Elizabeth, it's been a privilege talking to you, and it's a great play. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Tony Blair wanted us to join the euro. He's always been one of the most outspoken defenders of Brussels in this country, but these days he's followed everywhere by the shadow of the Iraq war and seems to have fallen out permanently with his party's leadership. I spoke to Mr. Blair a little earlier this morning, and I began by asking him about the big story of the day, whether the current level of EU migration is sustainable.
I think people's concerns about immigration are completely understandable. Indeed, this is a worldwide phenomenon. So it's not just a big issue here, it's a big issue in the rest of Europe, it's a big issue in America. And I understand why people think the levels are too high, but the fact is, one, the biggest problem we have is non-EU migration. And secondly, the reason why the Leave people have now really focused on immigration and day after day after day is because they've lost comprehensively the debate on the economy. And what is now clear, and I don't think they can really dispute, is that if we did vote to leave, the economic aftershock would be severe and directly measurable in jobs and living standards and business confidence.
Coming back to immigration, however, those people who are worried about it may be right. I mean, it may be that actually this country cannot absorb this level of immigration from the rest of the EU indefinitely. It was nearly 200,000 people from the EU last year, close to the record high.
Yeah, but I also think we've got to understand what we're really saying here. We're saying that we should leave the European Union and then put out the people who have come in from Europe to the UK.
Because they get to stay anyway because of the Luxembourg Compromise.
Right, but then if you look at how Britain functions going forward, I mean, some of these people play an absolutely fundamental part in services like the National Health Service. And even if we were to stop all EU immigration, you've still got the other issues to do with immigration. So I don't discount it as an issue. It's a really important issue. But it doesn't it's not going to go away as an issue if we leave the European Union.
But it's a really important issue that, while we're inside the EU, we can do nothing about. We have uncontrolled immigration from the EU so long as we remain in the EU. That is a fact, is it not?
Well, you've got the free movement of people within the EU, but by the way, it also applies to British people going out and working in the rest of Europe.
But it's uncontrolled in both directions, and we have big net migration. And my point is that inside the EU, we can do nothing about this.
Inside the European Union, we have to accept that there's going to be free movement of people. But by the way, even outside of the European Union, if we want access back into the single market, a country like Norway has had to renegotiate free movement of people. So actually levels of migration are higher in Norway and higher in Switzerland. So, you know, when you look at this rationally, yes, immigration's a big issue. It's not going to be solved by leaving the European Union. In fact, in some ways, as David Blunkett's just been pointing out, we will lose the ability to cooperate with other European countries in dealing with immigration from outside Europe.
But we have hundreds of thousands of people coming here now. If Turkey joins, and you're a big enthusiast for Turkey joining, that's another huge number of people. People look ahead and say this is just going to go on and on and on. Is there any limit in your mind for immigration into this country from the rest of the EU?
Woe on Europe and Turkey. OK, so Turkey, there is no possibility of Turkey joining in the near future. If Turkey ever does meet the accession terms, then it's a vote that we have a veto on in Britain. So, you know, to raise Turkey in this context is again to demonstrate why what they want to do is to raise the general fear of migration. Because when you look at the particular facts, their case just doesn't stack up. And
we're always told that things are not going to happen, and then they do. You yourself said that it was in Turkey's interest in its future to join the EU, and you're a big advocate of that, as was David Cameron, and we can therefore assume that in due course Turkey will join the EU.
No, you can't assume that because they've got to meet the conditions. However, yes, I certainly have been an advocate and always will be an advocate for us to apply to Turkey the same rules that we apply to everyone else. But the reality is there is no possibility of Turkey joining in the short term. And the people who are running the Leave campaign, they know that perfectly well.
But in the medium term, I mean, this is a vote, this referendum in a few weeks' time. This is a vote for a very, very long time in the future. In the medium term, Turkey and maybe other countries will join. What I'm saying to you is that the level of immigration from the rest of the EU into this country is more or less limitless.
Well, it's not limitless because obviously it only applies to those countries in the European Union. If people make this decision on June the 23rd on the basis of Turkey, I mean, it really would be making it on the basis of a hypothesis that if it ever does happen, it's not going to happen for a very long period of time, and the circumstances will be quite different.
In communities up and down the country with kind of very, very overcrowded A&E departments, with primary schools in crisis, because there's too many people, with no housing for a lot of people, people feel that there are already too many people coming into this country. And if we vote to remain, that is just going to carry on. Is there any kind of limit?
If we vote to leave, these problems will still remain. And in the end, for example, if you take the National Health Service...
People coming in as of right from the EU, that won't be there.
No, but, well, you then have to renegotiate all of the trading arrangements that Britain has. But this is a really important point, Andrew, because if you renegotiate those trading arrangements, and remember, half our trade goes into the European Union, so it's essential for us to do that. Number one, that is going to be a long, agonising process, and it's going to cast a pall of uncertainty over the British economy for many years. But secondly, if we want access back into the single market, we'll be renegotiating many of those things.
I mean, a lot of the people on the other side of the argument say that's not what we'll go for. We'll go for World Trade Organization rules and so forth. So it's not certain.
When they, Andrew, when they say they will go for the World Trade Organization rather than the EU, that is when anyone who knows about these things knows they have lost the argument completely. The idea that we would put our economic future into renegotiating our trading arrangements with the rest of the world through the WTO. The WTO is an organization that has one of the hardest tasks in the world. They have for years been trying to get a global trade round together unsuccessfully. The notion that it's some simple maneuver to put our trading relationships through the hands of the WTO, this is, to anybody who understands these things, it doesn't bear thinking of. And they must know that when they're saying these things.
It sounds like for you, immigration at any level is a price worth paying for economic growth. And
Look,
so,
by the way, I fought the last election, I fought in 2005 on immigration. Some of the most difficult pieces of legislation I put through the House of Commons were around asylum and cutting down the numbers of asylum seekers. I'm completely sensitive to the issue of immigration, and you have to be in politics today. What I'm completely opposed to is their answer to it, which is to get out of Europe. One, because it doesn't deal with the non-EU immigration, and two, because actually it doesn't even really deal with the EU immigration.
But the EU immigration is uncontrolled in a literal sense. Nobody can control that.
Yeah, but hang on a minute.
My question is, going back to that, so 185,000 this year. If it was 500,000 next year, 1 million the year after, if it just carries on growing, what's your message?
Well,
we can do nothing about this.
No, my message is very simple. There is a problem of migration, and there is a problem of migration generally. If you actually break down the figures on EU migration, then many of these people come in on short-term contracts and then will go back out again. Many of these people work in vital public services for us, and we also get the benefit of Britain. The reason we can travel around Europe without restrictions is because of the free movement of people.
Well, many people don't travel around Europe because they can't afford to. Priti Patel has said today that the Prime Minister is frankly too rich and out of touch, living a luxury lifestyle with those communities who feel most hard-pressed by immigration. And I'm sure she would include you as well in that.
I'm sure she would, but, you know, the idea that the people who are supporting the Leave campaign are all people living in diminished economic circumstances. Come on. I mean, we know the people who are bankrolling the Leave campaign and are supporting them heavily in the newspapers and elsewhere. These people are not exactly your ordinary person. So the argument about elites or not elites, this is a debate where this is probably the most important decision we're going to make since World War II, by the way. I mean, this is a vitally important question for the country. The fact is that these people, as I say, are focusing on immigration because on the economy, it is now clear that we are going to suffer a deep aftershock if we leave the European Union. And when you get I think the Economist newspaper's got a poll of economists, and 88% said that leaving would be a disaster. No, but hang on, 88% of economists, I can't think of any issue where 88% of economists have ever agreed. So, this is the thing we've got to work out. And we've got to understand this is a question about whether we leave Europe, not whether we join Europe. Right? If we were in a situation where we weren't in the European Union, that's one debate. We have over 4 decades got these interlocking economic relationships. You break that up. I mean, how can anyone argue that you're not going to have a problem afterwards economically? And you measure that. These people say they care about people's living standards and those who are the poorest members of our society. I mean, those are the people who are going to suffer.
Well, many of those people feel very strongly about immigration and do feel that it's too high, and listen to people like you and feel no reassurance at all because you can't tell them anything that's going to change if we stay in.
I can tell them lots of things can change in the way that we handle the immigration question. And
really?
In fact, yes, lots of things can change in how we handle the immigration question. But no, it's true. If you're part of Europe, there's the free movement of people, and it works both ways.
So when David Cameron said at the last election that he was going to get immigration down to the tens of thousands, that must have been nonsense, mustn't it?
No, because the majority of immigration into this country is non-EU.
But if you can't deal with the numbers coming in from the EU, you can't say tens of thousands, can you?
But what you can do is do, as he has negotiated with the EU, an arrangement on benefits and so on. And by the way, all the evidence is, again, that these people who come in from the EU, they contribute far more in taxes than they take in benefits.
Now, some people will say, this is Tony Blair speaking. This is the same Tony Blair who told us it was against our national interest not to join the euro. Wow, he was wrong about that.
By the way, we never put the issue to the British people on the euro.
Because of Gordon Brown.
No, because the economic case was not clear and unambiguous. And when these people say, which they often do, is you guys said all this about the euro. I went back and checked. No, we didn't. We said, unless there's a clear case economically for joining the euro, we won't put it before you. And
but you wanted us to join, didn't you?
No, I wanted us. Politically, I think it's important that Britain's at the heart of Europe. Economically, if you can't make the case for joining the single currency, you shouldn't do it. And economically, we couldn't.
But all those people who said this is a politically driven and eventually catastrophic system have been proved right. When you look what's happened across the south of Europe, Greece, Italy and Spain, this has been an absolute disaster of a policy. And my point is that people like you were in favour of it.
By the way, we were never in favour of Britain joining the EU, the euro, because in the end, as I say, the economics didn't stack up. Politically, I always said it was very important to position ourselves as if in principle you're in favour, but the economics has to be right.
But you said it was a betrayal of our national interest not to join.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I was always very, very clear that we should not join unless the economics were right. So when these people say, oh, they said all of this about joining the single currency, no, we didn't. The case for leaving Europe is a completely different case.
Okay.
Because even if you disagree with the euro, you surely don't disagree with Britain being part of the single market, because the single market, which, by the way, was a British achievement under Margaret Thatcher, the single market is essential for British jobs and British industry.
Can you say now, looking at what's happened to the Eurozone, that Britain should never join?
Well, there's no reason for us to take a position for the next 100 years, but there's no remote possibility of Britain joining the euro in the foreseeable future.
No remote possibility, right. In a few weeks' time, we vote to leave the EU. What is then the future for Britain 5 or 10 years out?
If we vote to leave, we will suffer an immediate shock to our economy. We will create years of uncertainty because we will then have to renegotiate all the complicated trading arrangements we have with the rest of Europe. And that isn't some hypothetical risk. It is something that you can and will see directly in people's jobs, in people's living standards, and in businesses' ability to work with confidence. So it's an enormous economic problem. And I don't think anyone can really dispute that. The question is that pain worth the gain? And what is then very difficult to see is what is that gain that these people say is so important?
All right. Now, I know you can't talk about the Chilcot inquiry and all of that, but after the kind of ghastly episode of the Iraq war, are you seriously in favour of us going into Syria to confront ISIS in Syria on the ground?
I'm in favour of confronting ISIS in Syria on the ground. We don't need to do it with our own troops, with our own boots in the ground, and we haven't. Although what the Americans have been doing recently in the support that they've been given has had a huge impact on this fight against ISIS. And let's be clear, this is a global problem today. Okay, it's not just ISIS in Syria. You've got ISIS in Libya. You've got Boko Haram in Nigeria. You've got Al-Shabaab in Somalia. You've got the groups out in the Philippines and Thailand. It's a global problem.
But at the core of this problem, we've got ISIS, so-called Islamic State, in Syria and Iraq, moving into a hideous vacuum created by the Iraq war, created by the Civil War, and therefore ultimately created by decisions that you took.
If you take the countries on the critical list today, okay, which would be Syria, Iraq, Libya and Yemen, in only one of those cases have you got a government that is capable of fighting terrorism and that is recognised as internationally legitimate, including by both Saudi Arabia and Iran, and whose Prime Minister turns up in the White House, and that's Iraq. So I understand all the issues, and we'll debate them when we get to Chilcot, but this idea that all of this comes from the decision to remove Saddam, no.
We can debate
You've
that.
You've got to go back into this and look at the roots of it.
The big problem that people still think is that you planned and thought you were going to war but didn't tell us.
Well, Chilcot will deal with all of these things.
And will you accept Chilcot's verdict on this as a fair assessment after all this time and all this evidence?
Well, it's hard to say that when I haven't seen it.
Have you not seen it?
Well, of course, you don't see the report until it comes out. So let's wait for that point. But I think when you go back and you look at what was said, I don't think anyone can seriously dispute that. I was making it very clear what my position was. And by the way, the thing that will be important when it does happen is that we have then a full debate, and I look forward to participating in that. I mean, make no mistake about that. It is really important we do debate these issues seriously because we've got huge problems, not just, I mean, people want to focus this all over the Middle East. all over the world, and let's debate about what is the right policy to deal with these
I
things.
hope very much I can persuade you to come back and sit in that chair. We can talk about it all in great length when the Chilcot report comes out.
I'm sure you can.
You said this week that you thought it'd be a terrible risk for the British people to elect an extreme government, and you seem to be talking about Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn is a risk, and do you want to see him as Prime Minister?
Yeah, I wasn't talking about Jeremy Corbyn, by the way. I was talking about the general populism that there is in the world today, and
it's just the words Jeremy Corbyn had been in the question, therefore they were associated.
Right, which is which way it goes. But what I was talking about, and this is a whole other interview, but is these insurgent movements of left and right that I think are driven by a great deal of anger and populism that is able to ride that anger, but they don't really provide answers to the problems we face.
Well, let me ask you about Jeremy Corbyn directly. I know that there's a bit of history here, but nonetheless, here is somebody who's honestly trying to create a new economic policy for new times, who is trying to address that anger, who is trying to think of new Labour policies for, not new Labour, but new, Labour policies for the NHS and education and so forth. Shouldn't you just get behind him and not be disloyal?
I'm not being disloyal. I mean, let's wait and see what those policies are. And you know, I don't disrespect him as a person or his views at all. But
could you,
know,
imagine,
in the end,
could you imagine telling people to vote Labour when Jeremy Corbyn is still Prime Minister?
Look, I'll always tell people to vote Labour because I'm Labour, so that's just the way I am. But you know, in the end, what is important, particularly in today's world, which is so uncertain and unpredictable, is I understand that how these movements are moving politics in an extraordinary way today. And you can see this across the Atlantic, you can see it here, you can see it around the rest of Europe. Personally, I would like to see the centre, and by that I mean the centre-left and the centre-right, get its grip back and its traction back on the political scene, because I honestly do believe that a lot of the solutions to the problems we face today are less about ideology and far more to do with practicality and understanding modernity and the way that the modern world works.
Very last question, I promised. Many of your friends, people who are close to you and have supported you all the way through, feel that you have become just too rich and too disconnected over the last few years. Yeah. And in the words of somebody, you have trashed the brand. What do you say to them?
What I say to that is, if you're reading stuff in the press about what I do nowadays, don't read it or believe it. Go and look at my website and you'll see what I actually do. I spend 80% of my time on unpaid work. I've just literally spent weeks in the Middle East, on the Middle East peace process there. I have 2 foundations. I employ around about 200 people. I have to raise the money and make the money for all of them. What we actually do is very good and exciting work around the world, but you won't read a bit of it here. So if you want to know what I do, go and read the facts.
Tony Blair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was Tony Blair talking to me a little earlier this morning. Now, before we go on, let's hear from Nikki Campbell about what's coming up immediately after this programme.
Join us from Oxford at 10, where we'll be asking just one big question. Did man create God? To debate that, we've gathered together theologians, philosophers, psychologists, writers and people of various faiths and none. Join us at 10 on BBC One.
Interesting stuff, and I'm joined once more by Liam Fox and Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis, you described Tony Blair as kind of a pot of poison for his side, his campaign. Having watched that interview, what do you make of it?
It was extremely hesitant. It was... he had some good points. The one point that I have to agree with him on is that exiting the EU is not the same thing as entering it. Well, I campaigned, for instance, as a young man against Greece entering the European Union, and I campaigned against entering the Eurozone in particular, of course. But to get out would not necessarily get you to where you would have been had you not entered. And that's a good point. But everything else, coming from Tony Blair, as supportive of my side of politics, is a kind of poison chalice, a kind of, poison.
I guess what a lot of people wonder about somebody like you, Yanis, is that you have seen the misery caused by the euro in your own country. You have migrants arriving in Greece at the same time, and yet you're saying to us, stay in. Mm-hmm. That seems odd.
Well, no one can accuse me of being a lackey of Brussels or of being a kind of euro loyalist. The reason why I'm doing this, just to be succinct, Andrew, is this. I don't buy the scare campaign of the Remain, that if you get out, there's going to be Armageddon the next day. This is all just nonsense. But what I do fear is that the European Union, as it is, under the weight of its hubris and malignancies and democratic vacuum and all that, is disintegrating. Brexit would cause an acceleration of this disintegration. And you cannot escape it. This disintegration is going to create a deflationary vortex and a political toxicity that will consume your country, even if you vote to leave. This is why I'm imploring you to stay in and fight with us to change the European Union, because you can vote to check out, but you can never leave, as the Hotel California song ends.
Before the last European elections, I spoke to one of the commissioners and I said, in these European elections, a third of the citizens are going to vote for parties that want to leave the European Union or destroy the European Union. What do you say to that? And he said to me, if 1/3 want to destroy it, 2/3 don't, so we'll continue as we are.
But
and that is my problem, is that those who are in control of the European project are set on a course they set way back in the 1950s, and they're not changing trajectory. One of the things that I hope is that if Britain chooses to leave, it will deliver such a shock to those controlling the European system that they understand they must change direction and run Europe for its citizens.
They will double down on their authoritarianism, and they will collapse in the same way that they collapsed in the 1920s and the 1930s, and that collapse is going to drag you down with them, because Britain is so intertwined with the European Union that a Brexit vote is not going to create the kind of cushion between you and the deflationary Europe that is necessary to be shielded from it.
I should say at this point, because you mentioned ever closer union, Liam Fox, that we got a message from Number 10 to say that Samantha Cameron had flung the controller. There was a severe danger of her breaking the Number 10 television set, because, of course, David Cameron has got us out of that.
Ever closer union will continue. The Eurozone needs to integrate to diminish the risks that the euro poses to monetary stability. They're going to go down that road. It doesn't matter what we think. That's the direction they have chosen. Ever since I came into the House of Commons 24 years ago, I've been told Europe is coming in our direction. It is not coming in our direction. It's continuing the path of integration, which I think is foolish and dangerous. I agree, it is dangerous. And until the European Union is run for its citizens and not a self-serving elite, the danger will be to us and to the continent and to wider stability. We have to get control and we have to leave.
Can I nuance this?
We're now completely out of time, but thank you both very much indeed. Very, very interesting. That's all we have time for today, I've just said. Next Sunday, Boris Johnson will be here arguing the case for Britain to leave the EU. But now we leave you with some fine music. The late, great John Peel once said that Laura Cantrell's debut album in 2000 was his favourite record of the last 10 years and possibly his life. From that album, here is Laura Cantrell with 2 Seconds. Enjoy the rest of the bank holiday weekend and goodbye.